Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to talk about it. I'm really excited I love South Park, and I actually just really recently came across a letter that I wrote to myself the first time I ever saw The Spirit of Christmas. For those of you who know that little one from 1997, Jesus versus Santa, that went viral via VHS tape in the mid-90s. So I've been watching South Park for decades now. But I really appreciate everyone coming out. This was a bit of a ploy because there is a lot of things we'd like to talk about, both about the episode, about how context or how satire works and how it doesn't work, what happens when it's out of context, hence the title of the talk, The Struggle with Satire. We have, let's see. Boom. All right, so we just watched the episode with apologies to Jesse Jackson, which was aired in season 11, 2007. It's actually aired about 6 months after the Michael Richards incident that they make reference to in the episode, but I'm particularly fascinated to talk about it in light of the Arizona episode with the t-shirts, the high school seniors who lined up and had N-I****ER. So, this is still a very relevant conversation. I really appreciate all of you coming out, even if it was just for pizza. Feel free to go over and get more pizza, please, at any point. You will not be interrupting. So, today we have a really great set of panelists. Professor Bob Thompson. Maybe I'll have each of them introduce themselves, but very briefly, we have Professor Bob Thompson from TRF here at Newhouse. I am Assistant Professor Charisse L'Pree. I'm in the Communications Department. We also have Dan Brown, who's a master's student, and I'll let him talk about his research, which is uniquely relevant to the conversation we're having today. Terra Peckskamp, and I'm sorry it's not in order, but that's totally cool. Terra Peckskamp, the Director of Residence Life, and Cedric Boton, the Coordinator of Student Engagement at the Office of Multicultural Affairs. Affairs, right? Okay, sweet. Awesome, so maybe I'll have each of you talk about just very briefly, and then we'll cut to what inspired this conversation. So I would really like for all of you just to introduce yourself in 1 or 2 sentences, and what your area of research, conversation, work that brings you to this panel today. We'll start with Professor Thompson.
I'm Bob Thompson. As Charisse said, I'm from the Television, Radio, Film Department, and I also direct the Blind Center for Television and Popular Culture. I've been here 26 years, and we watch a lot of South Park and All in the Family and all of these other kinds of things where this kind of conversation is constantly bubbling to the thing about satire and popular culture is everybody brings a different thing to what constitutes satire, which what makes it so complicated and at times dangerous.
Dan?
All right, I'm Dan Brown. I'm a master's in the media studies program. My thesis is currently I'm working on with a theory called social responsibility theory, and the general idea behind that is promoting pluralism and talking about culturally, socially relevant events, creating conversations. And I'm using South Park as I forget, I'm at a loss of words already in front of this crowd of people. I'm using that as to analyze and then show that this exists in the world. So that's what brings me here.
Good evening. My name is Cedric Boton. I am the coordinator of student engagement in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. I coordinate Verbal Blend Poetry Program, where we give students an opportunity to build their confidence and their voice in writing, as well as I coordinate Black History Month calendar activities. So I came into contact with this by knowing Charisse and the conversation that we generally were having and how we engage these types of spaces, right? And how we get our students to understand the choices they make, right? So then Verbal Blend, we give opportunities for students to give voice and write poetry about some experiences that may happen like that.
Hello everyone, I am Terra Peckskamp, the Director of the Office of Residence Life. I'm going to ask you a question, so please raise your hand if you either currently live in one of our residence halls or South Campus apartments or have ever lived in a residence hall or apartment on a college campus. All right, so, all right, here or anywhere. So part of the work that we do in Residence Life is when other people, intentionally or unintentionally, we want to have the conversation about it. We're not looking to ban words or to shut down dialogue, but we're not going to shy away from talking about that and to talk about what happened and to try to address and build stronger communities. And as Cedric said, to help all of us really think about what it is we're saying in the context that we're saying it and the impact that our words and actions have.
Thank you. And suppose I am Professor, I'm Charisse L'Pree, and I am an assistant professor in the communications department. My area of research is specifically media psychology, so I look at how media affects the way we think about ourselves and others. I am passionate about television. I was raised on television, and I love talking about television. So when one of my students came to me and described how something in a dorm affected her, I knew that it was related to this episode, and I wanted to continue this conversation. So, on that note, oh, and you are important to this conversation. And so please, at any point, if you have questions, if you have a thought, if you have something to add, and you all have something to add by simply being here. So thank you so much for coming. And I would also like to say thank you to Dean Branham, who could not be here, but delightfully supported ensuring that everyone is well fed and ready to have this discussion. So, for those of you who missed it, we'll come back and talk about the opening scene, but I think if you missed the opening scene, we'll come back to it, because I would rather you just hear about why we are here today. So on that note, I will introduce Stacy Fernandez, who is currently a freshman here at Newhouse, and I will shall I put it up, or do you want to put it up when you're ready? Okay, when you're ready.
Hey guys, I know like half of you. So I'm Stacy Fernandez, freshman here at Newhouse. So I'll just set the scene of what happened. So I was coming back up the Mount steps, you know, lots of steps, 116. And I go inside of I'm with a friend, and I go inside of one of the study rooms. We're going to go watch Scandal. And it's like a Friday night, so there's no one there because they're all out drinking. So I go inside, and I see this thing in one of the study rooms. The study rooms have these whiteboards, and it said this. So I was just coming from a very good night, and I trying to watch Scandal, and this is what happens. And you can't see it as well here. Like you can see it better in the if any of you know me on Facebook or
There we go. Turn on the light. There we go. So you can see it and appreciate it.
So the word, the A is erased, and you could see like very faintly that it was an A and also an I, like it was very faint. And this was offensive to me because of the word that was there. I didn't know beforehand that it was a South Park episode, but just seeing that, and especially with it coupled along with the hangman, was offensive because obviously, well, I identify as Afro-Latina, so being a person of color, this word, I personally feel like it applies to all people of color, or, yeah. So, I found it very offensive, and with the hangman next to it, it was kind of like they're hanging people of color, people who could be offended by this word. So that's why I found it offensive, and then when I posted it on my social media platforms, a lot of the responses I got were saying, oh, it's no big deal, it's just a South Park episode, like, it was just a joke. And I was starting to think, like, am I crazy for feeling this way? So I very nervously went up to Professor L'Pree after class, and I was like, hey, so this happened, what do you think? And then that's what sparked this whole thing.
Thank you for sharing. So I'll take this opportunity. For those of you who have taken my class, I have, as I assume all of us do, a troubled relationship with this word. I have a troubled relationship with the phrase N-word. I have a troubled relationship with the word itself. But I will take this moment to give a disclaimer that we will use the phrase N-word tonight. I don't like that phrase. It bothers me because it actively strips and sanitizes the pain that comes with that word. And I think that pain is relevant to our educational processes. But in the interest of engaging in conversation, so for those of you who have taken my class and have heard me say that word in class, I think you all see the pain in my face. We talk about why that word is used. It's a very long, drawn-out process by which we come to using that word in class. Having said that, we don't have 16 weeks to develop a relationship tonight. So just to keep everyone and keep the conversation moving, I will tell you that we will use the phrase N-word, and we understand that that is actively problematic in and of itself. But we're here today, and we're talking about it, and that's what's most important. So basically what's going to happen, I'm going to give you a couple, I want to talk about what satire is very briefly, and then I invite you to think about a couple questions, and I'll pose a few questions to the panel as well, to really talk about what is happening, what Parker and Stone, Trey Parker and Matt Stone are trying to do with this episode, how this episode can be used to change the way we engage with each other, and then also what pieces, if separated, do we lose? What meaning do we lose when we just use the first 90 seconds of the episode? So very briefly, I promise it's not going to be all the PowerPoints for those of you who take my class. Not going to be that bad. Satire is defined as the use of humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize. It's really key. Expose and criticize social and individual stupidity. It's the definition. We could talk about the word stupidity in and of itself, or ignorance, or short-sightedness, particularly in the context of contemporary politics and other topical issues. So that's our definition of satire. So we already know that we're taking something to the extreme in order to demonstrate and ridicule the space that we're actually living in at the moment. And we see that in the case of this episode with apologies to Jesse Jackson. So I would invite, and I can invite the panel if you like, we can invite the audience to answer the following question. What or who is being criticized in this episode, and how are they being criticized, and why are they being criticized? So actually, why don't we pose that to Professor Thompson to start?
Well, I would like to start even before that.
Please do.
Answer your question as to whether you were crazy or hypersensitive or whatever. It's for one thing, for satire to work, everybody has to be in on the thing that's being satirized. And even though, let's just Flint Hall, you remember?
Yes.
Even though probably most people in Flint had seen South Park at some point, no guarantee that they'd seen that episode, and most of the people in this room had not seen that episode, and you guys are right in the South Park demographic. So the assumption that that would be understood in terms of South Park is completely not an assumption whoever wrote that should have made. But even if, let's assume everybody in the world had seen that episode, popped on there with the hangman, which by the way, even though Wheel of Fortune is based on hangman, there is no actual lynched person on the thing, is totally anonymous. So if someone came up to you and said that joke, and you'd say, I can't believe what you're saying, they go, oh no, it's a South Park episode, you then negotiate that. It's done totally anonymous, which means there's no way of doing that. I would find that anonymity is threatening, I think it's aggressive, I think it's scary. I get scared when people leave anonymous notes under my door that are complimentary. It creeps me out. And this is by no means, in any context whatsoever, complimentary. So, right off the bat, I think the idea that this would be in any context, definition of satire or other, even remotely close to anything but offensive and inappropriate is not even up for discussion, it would seem to me.
Well then,
Well, what's being criticized?
Well, we can hold that question,
Yeah.
because actually what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn to the rest of the panel and ask, what is, and I appreciate you pausing me, how did you react when you saw this? And the answer is no. Is Stacey crazy, right? Like, so how, and even in that phrasing, how were you struck by this image?
Well, actually, you showed me the picture. If you didn't know, I was Dr. L'Pree's DA, so I saw the picture at the same time, and you said the same thing. You said, people told me, oh, it's South Park, don't worry about it. If that's all they're taking from it, they're ignoring the next 22 minutes that happens in that episode that creates the conversation of what goes on after it. And then technically they're also saying that since it's on TV, now you have carte blanche to be racist, and it's perfectly okay, which is absolutely not acceptable. So no, it's two people, you're not crazy, so super exercise.
You're going to Hollywood.
I think when I first got the first look at the image, it bothered me because all of our first impulse is the safety of our students first. So my mind automatically went to the person who might have seen it but didn't speak up about it, give voice to it. You gave voice to it, right? But however, the persons who are out there who may have, they're not as vocal about things, may be still impacted by it. So how do we reach those people, right? These are the things that we think about, right? I think that's why it's important for this space that we have today. Fortunately, people who probably did it, probably not here today. Maybe they are, I don't know. But I was pretty bothered because I thought of my students and how, if I was that student, who saw it, or maybe even you, I don't know, maybe I would have been home bothered, because I wouldn't know what South Park was, And I didn't watch South Park, so I didn't even know until I saw the clips, and I was like, oh, it's like, now I get it. But if I didn't get that contextualized, I would have been calling home or, going to seek other friends to talk to them about it. So I think the good space about it is that we're talking about it, right? We're giving more awareness to it so that people are paying attention to the things that they're, it's the actions that we do, the cause and effects, right?
And even if I could just make a note before Terra takes her turn, is I would ask you, for all of you who watched this episode, how many of you were offended at some point during the episode? How many of you were a little shocked, appalled, anything of the sort, right? So even when you're sitting there watching it in context, there are moments where you're caught off guard, where you feel that pain. I actually ask my students often, can you think of a time when you were so offended you thought you were going, I'm sorry because I know everyone's eating, but did you ever feel so offended you thought you were going to vomit, right? That you got this visceral response. And so even in that, even when we see it in context and we're having a conversation about it, you can still get that feeling. And that is still really, really relevant and worth talking about. I'm sorry, Marcus.
No, this is great. I think part of my reaction to this, and when I saw it and you got the photograph emailed to me, it hits, like I get a because of what Cedric is talking about, because of students who do speak up, because of students who see this and don't say anything and are just hurt, and maybe talk about it with a family member, maybe talk about it with a friend. And I also know that this is part of my work. As much as it is working to address issues when students are drinking themselves silly, this is part of my work to try and have dialogue and conversation about this and to roommate conflicts, all of it that goes into living in residence halls. We have 3,500 first-year students every year new to SU campus. And our incidents, we call them bias-related incidents, is heaviest in the fall with our new students. And a lot of that is because folks are doing things like this and thinking it's funny, and there's a learning opportunity that we hope to be able to engage with, and we don't always get the chance. And then there's also the support systems that we hope we're able to create or direct students to. If we're not the support system, you found your support system. You were plugged in, which is fantastic. Not every student is. And so what are the support systems that we have in place institutionally for students who see this and are hurt and have that visceral reaction to things? So that is as much a part of the work in residence life as roommate conflicts, as addressing alcohol issues, and as making warm, friendly environments, because this is not a warm and friendly environment.
Thank you. So, given the complexity of the issue, I felt that it was really essential to talk about satire. And I say this explicitly because this is not a new conversation, right? This is the same conversation we've had with probably before, but historically speaking, we talk about Archie Bunker and All in the Family, right? How do you engage with the quote-unquote lovable bigot, right? Someone who spouts these horrible things, but what is the context in which this person is being placed, right? So, on that note, if you're ready, we can go into what makes this, what works in this episode, and why doesn't this work? I'll open that to you guys.
Well, I think right from the very beginning, and South Park is a smart, I think very overly offensive. There's times where I can't believe what South Park does that they're still doing, even after these many years. But even in that very first scene, completely without any context, the first thing that I think it criticized was myself, who was viewing it, because I have to confess, and I'm not proud of this, but when I watched that, and maybe it was because it was South Park and I knew what they were up to, but it never occurred to me that the word naggers was a completely legitimate word. I mean, that wasn't, there's only 5 vowels I could have put in there. And that didn't even occur to me. And when they all pause, and she turns over the A, I think, oh yeah, I could have thought of a perfectly decent word when I saw the rest of those things. And so right off the bat, this, I think, show is really good at making us uncomfortable, even who think we're on the right side of this argument and who have these sort of self-congratulatory attitudes. That hit me upside the head in the first 45 seconds. But then I'm still not convinced these Parker and Stone people are totally without. I felt the same way at the end of that, but it was different. And I love that suite. Token, who's of course, I guess appropriately, but problematically named, is always sort of the voice of reason. He's the one who kind of carries the moral of the story. But there's other stuff that happened here, and I see the idea, and I think it was useful to, let's take this idea of a word that really, really hurts people, and let's put it in the context of putting it into the majority, put it on a white guy, he'll bear it for a while. And that was interesting. I think that allowed us to see it in a little different, from a little different perspective. But it also means that he then co-opts, he's the good guy for a while in this. I think it was especially the case when he goes to the poetry slam. And that was a decent poem. I mean, if you took out the guy from all of that thing, that was a pretty good poem. And it expressed that everything that, the power of words and all the rest of it. But, so he's kind of at least the co-opted good guy that's going to teach him a lesson in a different way. But then he joins forces. Michael Richards and Mark Furman, and they never really play that out. And that's where, by the end, I was also thinking, I don't get it. Not so much in terms of what the moral of the story was, but I'm not sure what they're really up to. And if anybody has heard the director's commentary, the first 5 minutes of this, if we didn't know who Parker and Stone were, I think we'd make some pretty not so good judges. They're slinging the word midget around. It takes them halfway through the commentary before they finally say, oh, I'm sorry, little people. Like that kind of grudging, oh, I'm sorry, African Americans, like they want to be called now. It was a kind of a sarcastic, grudging whatever. And the first line of the commentary, followed by ha ha ha, Dr. L'Pree and I have talked about this before, makes me always wonder if the shock I feel at South Park is because it's so intelligent that it's making me uncomfortable as it gets me to an interesting place. Or sometimes if these guys maybe aren't protected totally by satire. Sometimes maybe just a couple of bastards.
So just the opening, if you listen to the commentary, we can listen to it. If you like, we can listen to it a little later. It says, yeah, we've been wanting to do an N-word. They don't say N-word. We've been wanting to do an N-word episode for some time now. Right? So even in that moment, you're like, oh, okay, so all right. And then the Michael Richards incident happened. How many of you have seen that footage of the, right, okay. So that's also linked later, if to fill you all in, on 10 years of failed comedy. Then when that happened, they were like, oh, well, now we have a context, right? This phrase, this N-guy phrase, and unpacking that. But, I think for me, the most powerful scene, and I encourage all of you as well, the scene that I love the most is when he goes to Congress. Actually, aside from that, when Token, like everything Token says is so brilliant. He's like, so Jesse Jackson is not the emperor of black people. And in the commentary, they say that they have, interestingly enough, they have a all white congressmen, right? We don't see any congresswomen, so we can talk about the intersectionality of the affair. But all white congressmen, and all of a sudden the fear, the panic that this word could come to mean them. At no point, and then he said, oh yeah, well, separately they're totally fine, but together it's a painful missile of hate. And like that one black congressman's like, you have got to be kidding me, right? That we were having this whole conversation and not able to layer it onto the experience of a large percentage of the American population since the 16th century, right? So in that moment, that's my favorite moment of the episode. And yeah, there are a lot of places where you're like, I don't know if you know what you're saying here.
Well, the whole
But that
history
was the
thing
moment.
at the scholarship, where and that's so consciously, you guys just wouldn't get the fact that I'm suffering over things that happened way back in the past, over lame things that happened in history.
Right.
That to me was the funniest part. But funny in a way that I'm uncomfortable laughing unless I'm in a room all that.
Right. And we see those exact same things happen over and over again. Oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm not racist because I have a black friend. Or I'm so sorry, let me start a scholarship and we'll call it a day. I believe recently it was the, and we should be using our word as well, I'll point that out, but it was the Redskins Scholarship for Native Americans. Right, so I believe Colbert said, oh, because if you only use what Redskin once, it's okay in your name. Right, that this idea of how can I make it better? And that's exactly what Stan is doing. He's like, I made it better, so we're cool, right? I apologize, so we're cool, right? When in reality, the apology is not the problem. Were there scenes that touched you?
I was going to say, I think that's what they're criticizing, is that every time something like this in society happens, you make your apology to Jesse Jackson, and then it's clean slate, move on, but that's not the way it is. I thought it was, at the end of the episode, it was the, which I like to think is the thesis statement of the episode, I don't get it. Yeah, exactly, you don't get it, and that's what happened. You make whoever's in trouble makes the apology, and it's like, oh yeah, I totally get it, man, see you later. He's out of the spotlight, she's out of the spotlight, and the topic's never brought up again until the next time it happens. So I thought that's what they were, commenting on society, the way it gets erased every time,
I don't know with me, it's like a child when we walk into the classroom and the professor can come in with his suit and tie on, and the child can check out before the first word the professor says. So I kind of checked, I was watching it, but it's like, I was checking out, and it was really...
How many times did they use the word? You said 48 times? Did you look that up online?
I counted it at one point, but I don't remember. It's used a lot. Not as many as the S word in that episode. That was 264, and they kept a counter on the corner.
They're saying that. I'm not saying, you hear the word, but you see what's going on. You say, okay, what's the teachable moments here for me, for conversations, right? Poetry sticks to me because I do poetry, and I'm glad you chimed in as one of the areas like, maybe it's something I could use, and see what happened if we did that in a workshop. What would students say? Like, who is the speaker if they don't see the image?
Right.
So, it's some things that could be used for conversation pieces. And then, I can say I don't like this, I don't like that, but I don't know, it's just something about watching. That's why I think I could never get into South Park, because I don't want to be frustrated, watching something like that.
Absolutely.
I think for me, this kind of goes back to the question you'd asked originally, who's being satirized in this episode? I think part of it, I can see student affairs, residence life, programs on campus being somewhat kind of, because when you take something and you try and do education around it, or you say, go to an event, make yourself more aware, kind of those types of
an
things.
African-American comedian at the comedy store. Let me go there.
I think that, I think about the efforts that we make across campus to engage students, to engage ourselves, each other, faculty, staff across the board. Some of them hit their mark, some of them do not, and some of them actually, I think, do damage. So I think that depending on how something is done, it can have a great, be really authentic, have good conversation. And other times, I think folks walk away going, I got absolutely nothing out of that. And in fact, I think I got hurt by, or whatever or somebody maybe, went a few steps backwards in their knowledge base. So I think, you know, for me, that's a piece that I was kind of thinking about throughout all of this is good intentioned white people, kind of that type of, you know, image that's out there, or actuality within it also.
I guess this seems like a good place to open the floor. If you guys have a moment that you thought was really interesting in the episode, that made you think about something differently, a moment you did not like in the episode, and maybe how you would have contextualized it different. Would anybody like to volunteer? Ooh, sweet. Okay. Oh, no.
So when you know it.
I do. This is what I do in class all the time. Tell me anything. It's not sure. It is? Oh, sweet. Okay, Shariah, Olivia, and Mark. And then those were the three I saw at first. Welcome to my classroom. Shariah.
Okay, there wasn't one specific moment that I liked, I guess, in the episode, but I think that I kind of like how throughout the entire episode, like, he's being called this name, and, like, ironically, he's being treated like an actual black man. Like, when he went to the store and he grabbed the Advil, and like, what are you doing? Like, you're not welcoming here. And then, like, when the, like, white guys on the shop, like, came up and, like, harassed him, it's like, that used to happen, it still does happen in some places. Like, I think that he doesn't even realize that he's being treated like a black man the entire time. And in the end episode, they're like, you just, like, never understand what it's like to be in someone else's body. You can understand that he's never gonna get it, I guess, and that's what the guys really do, but I think I like that they do actually feel like a black man.
And I in that moment, that same one where he's walking down the street and those three kids like come up on skateboards and start calling him that name, I leaned over to Cedric and I was like, kids learn quick, right? That these are things that happen. These are things that happen today, right? And for those of you who take race and gender 346, you know, we talk about these issues, how quickly children pick up on social patterns and repeat them. Right? This is not something that happened before. This is something that's happening now. Olivia.
In reference to the question of like who's being criticized or what's being criticized, I think that like from the moment that he realizes that he messed up, he's just trying to defend himself and like saying that he's not a racist and like his whole journey is like trying to get that label taken off of him, and I think just like that term has been replaced with racist.
Okay.
And that like often like he goes all the way to Congress to try and like get rid of this thing that is almost like worse than being like I'm sorry, what was your name?
Shariah.
What Shariah had said about being treated like a black man, like I don't know. Like I think that they were playing on the idea that like someone who has been called a racist, it's like that's reverse racism. Like you're treating me like this terrible person, but like it's not that. Like it's not worse. Like
Right.
you need to accept your actions and like try to understand like what the impact that you said had on others. Kind of.
Absolutely. And that is a big, like, the whole effort is, how can I prove I'm not racist? What do I have to do? I'll give you money. I'll kiss Jesse Jackson's backside. Like, I literally do all the things except listen.
And like the congressman that was like, I've never had a racist thought in my life. Like it's so scary for people to talk about, but like you're never gonna get past it because we made conversations about it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, two things I really like, going back to the beat poach thing, is I like when you watch something like this and like when you first see it back when it first comes out, you're like, oh, that's pretty relevant. And as it goes on, it sort of becomes more and more relevant. And so what I like about the poetry scene, besides the fact that it's like, you know, like a pretty nice parody, is that it's like, he sort of sees this thing of this group he now like is supposed to be relating to, but isn't. He's sort of making that joke over and over. And he takes the tool of beat poetry to like make his own points without like really understanding it. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, you know, you always see the discussion of when is cultural appropriation appropriate in that. So I thought that was sort of cool. And then going back to like who criticized, I agree that it's sort of criticized the people who are like, the way to solve this is either like check some boxes or just make them go away. Because I think it's interesting when like Michael Richards and them come to save him, they're like sad that they're like been excluded, but they don't show like any remorse. Like there's the one guy who's nameless who like is like, oh well, I was just talking about Mexico, I was being ironic. How would people not get it? Which then also comes out with what she was saying about how the congressman was like, I've never had a racist thought, but I just feel like like now, maybe more than ever, maybe it's just the same and I'm seeing it more, that so many people, instead of, when they have hateful thoughts, instead of like admitting it and thinking like, why do I think these, they just want to try to cover up and be like, no, I've never, couldn't think of that. So I think it definitely targets the people who think like, well, I'm not an actual racist, that thought was an accident.
Right. And we're seeing this now again, right, in Arizona last week. And I was just shocked when I saw that because we're coming back to the same conversation. Why is this funny, right? One in the middle, that smile kills me, right? Why is this funny? And is it okay if I didn't actually use the word? There are no G's, we're censoring ourselves, so it's ironic. But the lack of context and thought and engagement and discussion around the issue is really painful. Other thoughts? I want to go with Tom. What?
That's it, yep.
Awesome.
One of my favorite parts in the episode is when they parody one of I think maybe the most important films really about this topic, which is a Sidney Poitier movie, In the Heat of the Night.
Mm-hmm.
And they parody it in a couple places, and it's really interesting how they parody a movie that's so meaningful, and they parody it to make a complete like a point in a very similar fashion, but they use parody to satirize to really make a similar point. So I think it's very interesting.
Can you unpack a scene for us? One
Sure.
one of them that you really enjoyed, and how it was a parody, and what connections you thought they were making.
Okay, one of my favorite parts is when the truck full of seemingly what you'd expect to be racist characters hop out of the truck, and they say, "Well, how dare you, make like insult entire race of people?" And in the actual movie, of course, it's Sidney Poitier,
Right.
And it's just very interesting about how you see it's like the exact opposite of the scene in the movie, but yet it has the same message in a broader sense, which I think is very interesting how they can use such a non-satirical, very serious piece of work and to make it into so meaningful with satire.
Excellent. All right, the person next to you is in my class right now, correct? Yeah, but I don't remember your name. It's still early in the semester. Tell me your name again. Taryn.
Yeah, and I actually kind of had the same example of the redneck guys who came along. That was probably the funniest moment to me because even before they get out and have a dialogue, you see them roll up to him and then they start chasing him. And I had the response like, should they be congratulating him for being racist? Like, the signage of them having the Confederate flags and stuff made me think, oh, these can't be good people, obviously, and it was a really funny turnaround. Obviously, I mean, they played up, they all had guns and were acting extra crazy, but even just that scene of some Confederate people rolling up on Confederate repping people, and that signage alone was a pretty funny joke to me. Both around.
Excellent. We'll come to Eric, Isaac, Jasmine. Okay.
Just a quick
Excuse me, Professor Brewer.
quick question which nobody's brought up, sort of understandably, is the whole B plot line with Cartman and the speaker or whatever. So Cartman's story starts with him declaring a winner in a race war, white wins yet again. And then he learns nothing, grows in no way, shape, or form, and still beats the guy up in front of the crowd, which is then sort of spun in this way I didn't totally get as the guy's leaving, saying, well, I guess I proved my point or whatever. What do you make of that in the middle of all this, as the story is about Stan's growth and Stan's father's growth, and then Cartman, who just grows not at all?
Well, one of the points that we had later, and we can bring it up now, is specifically the role of Cartman throughout the entire series, right? At any given point, you, much like Archie Bunker, you are invited to laugh at Cartman. And that's why for me, when he busts out laughing, when, the motivational speaker with 2 PhDs, right,
That's the part that made me laugh.
when he comes out and Cartman just starts laughing uncontrollably, and the other students are embarrassed, and the administration is embarrassed, And we're embarrassed, right? Because we're like, that's the wrong behavior. And now we're laughing at him because he can't stop laughing. But the question comes down to, at what point do we laugh at Cartman? At what point do we laugh with Cartman? The last scene is a little complicated, and they talk about it in the commentary where they say, we spent a lot of time deciding who was going to win that fight. And they don't really talk about how they resolved it or came to the end, but you're right, I felt like in the end it was just a strategy to get Stan to say, I don't get it, right? That he walked away and made his point. So I thought that storyline was interesting, but not fully fleshed.
No, I think that storyline is really key, because it's the Rosetta Stone that you can read the sincerity of the whole rest of it. If you listen to the commentary, they're talking about, like you say, we always wanted to do our N episode, and they don't use, they complete that word, and then they all laugh. It's very uncomfortable. And then they say, well, we finally got around to doing it, and then whatever, the Michael Richards things happened, that made us do it. But the one thing we had to get in there was we wanted Cartman to fight a midget, and then they all laughed hysterically. And they never really say why that's important, and it was the same way that you used to have tossing, all that kind of stuff. I don't think they had any sense. So in some ways, that B storyline, to me, completely compromises, in many ways, whether I'm willing to buy and give them the license to do all the stuff they do on this and many other episodes. Because they pull a lot of pretty serious stuff. But you give them that, you figure they're holding the satire license. And when I hear that commentary and I see how messed up that B story was, because first he wins, the Cartman gets down, and then in the end he hits him and Cartman falls down. It was a mess of a thing. And you say about that laughing with, again, I have to confess, it's offensive, but the fact that Cartman never stops. They milk that so long that it actually starts getting funny. And then when he makes the beaver joke, see if they'll build a dam, and oh look, he's turning red. He looks like a little strawberry. I'm like having a hard time. It's getting funny. It's so absurd. So I think that B story, in many ways, makes me a lot more suspicious of this whole enterprise because of the way in which they handle it.
And I haven't heard the commentary. I don't watch a lot of South Park. I've seen some of them. But part of how I've always taken Cartman, and especially in here, is to me he's like uber privilege. He's, white privilege, able privilege, gender, sexual orientation, whatever.
But the minute you mention his size, that's wrong.
Right. So he to me kind of...
Who the hell put you up to that?
Embodies this not only kind of in his own kind of individual lack of empathy, lack of self-awareness type of person that we run into at times, but also the systemic and just how difficult that can be to when you kind of keep coming up against a systemic issue in whatever capacity. It's difficult to kind of get a system to move or change. Not impossible, but I think to me that's kind of where I was going with it. And again, at the same time, having seen some other episodes of South Park, kind of going, really? Are they doing, what? No, stop. So I'd be conflicted about it as well. So.
I would say, I think they're aware of the stagnation of growth. I mean, otherwise Kenny wouldn't die in every single episode, right? That is the metaphor for, and this is why I love sitcoms, right? Everything restarts 22 minutes later. So there will never be growth. And they very rarely make mention of other episodes, right? There's no connection between them. So I think the Cartman, the B narrative can be appropriate and can be faulty. It depends on what you bring to it, right? All right, so there are two other hands. Let's come to Isaac. I'm not quite sure whether you want to talk about something before.
I was just going to say, I think the magic of South Park is that they, actually make fun of everyone that, thinks that this is a serious show to laugh at. I think, they're laughing at us, or not us necessarily, because we're talking about this, but the people that think South Park is about Cartman and making fun of people. I think they're actually kind of looking through that lens, and that you shouldn't laugh about this and you should have conversations like this, because there are serious issues that go on in South Park.
So there were a couple. Let me come to Jasmine because I have the two of you, and then we'll come over to Jesse, and then back to Olivia. Jasmine?
I just like the way they represent the cyclical nature of racial stories that happen. The instances when you make a product statement, you go to some prominent black figure, you go through the cycles like checking off the list, okay, now the story's over, and we're on to the next incident. So I think that that's really, to name the episode with apologies to Jesse Jackson, I think it's pretty brilliant on that part. I like that.
Absolutely. There's Jesse and then Olivia.
I just had a question. As professors and assistant professors and administrators, when you come across a Eric Cartman type in Syracuse or wherever you may be, like, what's the, I mean, in a school fashion, what's your approach to that? How do you combat that?
Can I just be honest with you? I always taught in inner city school, and if a kid was like Cartman, the students were taking care of him. It just, yeah, if someone was being like that, so I actually had very little experience with that, just based on where I taught, so I can't speak for that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I went from a private school to a public school and I saw that shift. So, I mean, if anyone else, it's interesting, yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that because depending on your environment, and I saw this a lot with my experience, is that it'll completely change. And I think Syracuse is kind of not as much like my experience with private school, but it is much more like private school than it was public school.
I know in my years of being here, there may have been a few students who probably had that identity. And I think the best thing you can do is just try to be a good mentor, just try to give them good advice. Because, essentially the student's going to do what they have to do until something affects them. When it affects them, something comes back to them, then, it's like the storyline. It's like, oh, this is now affecting me now. Because someone's calling me an end guy, right? So it's like, until it's an aha moment on you, you ain't gonna get it. So you just have to, try to work through it,
And I think for me, a couple different things. One is, some students you have a conversation with, they're like, oh my God, no, it was a joke. Don't you be, kind of what they're, it's South Park, why aren't you laughing? So, and students will kind of call each other out on way more than anything I ever know, quite honestly, and some do, some don't, but I think much more goes on than what actually bubbles up to my attention. The pieces that I get are the really nasty roommate conflicts, the nasty parents, before first year students even get to campus and they're calling the office saying, my little Susie or Johnny or whomever can't live with so-and-so because of XYZ reason. Like, are you, okay, we're gonna go there, all right. So at that point it comes down to behavior. And if a student will not change their behaviors, then that is where we have a little bit more teeth with something. And then it can hit them literally where they live, because they won't be living with us any longer.
So when you say can't live with so-and-so for XYZ reason, is XYZ reason because of what someone did? Or who someone is?
Who someone is. So
I can't have my child living with this person because they are X.
Exactly.
Not because they said something nasty.
Exactly. Sometimes they'll flat out say with a black person, and get the whistle.
You're trying to tell me this, Mark.
Yeah, or they'll couch it, or with somebody from this zip code. So they're making assumptions based on a whole variety. Facebook, mom and dad are on so-and-so's Facebook page, looking at everything, and making assumptions based on what's on whatever information they think they have that is accurate or not. They're making things up sometimes.
I gotta admit, I couldn't live with anyone from the 902. So I can sort of see that.
I want to say to your question is that I had a student years ago, I'm not going to bring up an incident that happened, but he said to me, when the situation happened on campus in Reno, dealing with television years ago, he said, you're a little bit too tight, and because of the Dave Chappelle, shows, let it go, Cedric. That's what he said to me, and I was just like, I'm a very conscious person, and I pay attention to a lot of things. I have to, and I wasn't that I was tight. It's just that, and he said it. It's really, like a guy like you, just tight. Let it go. Laugh sometimes, and it doesn't work for me, because I read in between the lines of that stuff. You know what I mean?
So do you watch South Park?
I don't watch South Park. This is the first time from the email in December, that's the first time I watched. I don't watch it because I don't, if it's like, for instance, when Kanye West came here years ago, he says, in his, he uses the word N-word, so he says, this is the one time in my show where all the white people can say this word. And I'm looking, I'm going left and right, because they all now want to say the N-word at unison, right? And I'm like,
that sounds like a mob.
Right, exactly. To me, that's exactly what's going on, me and my wife. So essentially, it doesn't, it's insensitive for someone to say something like that to people who have gone through so much, right? And I'm supposed to settle for being, that's cool. I'm not gonna lie. Because it could be insensitive to a little person. It's not just because it's African American. It's a lot of people because all of these stuff in this sector, right? So I'm not just thinking about black people. I'm thinking about LGBT. I'm thinking about, disabilities. I'm thinking about all of these things, because these are the people that we are coming into contact with every day that are having these conversations in our office. Like, did you hear that, Cedric? They said that. They said this,
And I'll admit, the minute this came to me, I was like, yo, I gotta call you, man.
I mean, and think about when Alicia Gardner will come here on 23rd, come to that event. I'm quite sure she's going to cover some of that and talk about the whole Black Lives Matter movement and Andrew Chapman stuff. That was a blow. So.
That was smooth. I believe Olivia had her hand up next.
Right.
Do you remember what you were going to say?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
It's about the B storyline.
The B storyline.
I feel like at first I thought that Cartman and Randy ended up in the same place. But like Randy was close, like Randy was like almost there, but then he just couldn't, cause like, I don't know, I feel like going to Congress, if he had gone to Congress to try to get like the N-word, like made illegal, then like maybe, but like.
You're so close. You're
Yeah,
so
he's
close.
so close. Cartman is like one of those people that you can't teach them not to be this way. So like, the person who came, the little person who came, was like, tried to teach him by calling him Fatso, but like, that didn't work. It didn't work. And
He was offended, and then he turned around and started laughing at the dude again.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, the fight, like, that they had, like, the literal fight that they had, I was thinking of like all of these Facebook interactions that I have, where it's like, we just try to hurt each other, like hurt each other's character, but like none of us learns anything, and so it's just like, I don't know, Stan was the only person who learned anything, because he was like, I don't get it, like, I'm gonna like, give up my pride right now. The other two were trying to like, Carmen didn't know what's going on.
And for those of you, and then we'll come to Jesse in the back. Okay. For those of you who went to the MLK celebration on Sunday with Marshall Lamont Hill, and I appreciate Tiana for busting out the quote in class last week, that the most important thing we can do is listen. That is the trait that is most human, most American, most conscious aware, is to listen to other people's stories. And it takes Stan the whole episode to realize, oh, let me just ask you how this makes you feel, instead of telling you, oh, you shouldn't be mad at me now. We're cool, right? And he just wants Token to say, yeah, we're cool, right? He just wants this whole thing to be over. All of them just want this whole thing to be over. But in reality, the only way for us to even take the first step is to listen to the experiences of others. Jesse? Nope, Mark. Beards got me. Mark.
So just one quick thing on Cartman. What I think I like about the character of Cartman is that you always know that like he's going to be wrong, like he's very, very rarely ever in the right of anything. So like, while a South Park episode is discussion, it even would be in his old catchphrase when he would say, "Screw you guys, I'm going home." That anytime it got close to him, like having to defend himself or too close to home for him, he would just remove himself from the situation, and the episode would go on to have whatever the debate was. So I think a great thing South Park does is it's sort of really blunt, negative stuff that other satire shows maybe wouldn't want to include, the fear of being misunderstood. They have this tool that everyone knows, is familiar with the show, is that he's going to be in the wrong, and that his viewpoint is able to be used for that.
I will point out one comment that a student shared in a class once, and this is a secondhand comment, so this is what one of his high school teachers said, was you can always tell the smart, engaged students from the not so smart, not so engaged students the day after South Park. Because the smart, engaged students are talking about the episode. The not so smart, engaged students are repeating Cartman jokes. Right? So to understand that there's two different things happening here. There's the program and then there's Cartman. There's how they're using Cartman and do we engage with Cartman. So to go back to Archie Bunker for president, right? How many of you are familiar with All in the Family and Archie Bunker? Okay, so that's a classic television show. And I guess I'll throw it, we've been talking for quite a while.
Well, yeah, it was 5 years in a row, #1, which was only tied by Cosby and then finally beaten by American Idol. It was this huge thing, and very important in that it was the first, remember this came out when the big shows of the decade had been Flying Nuns and Talking Horses and I Dream of Jeannies and all that kind of stuff. And All in the Family comes out and starts talking about issues of race. They had a new neighbors, African-American neighbors, the Jeffersons, had just moved in. Famous Sammy Davis episode. Archie once gets a blood transfusion and finds out it's from a black man and thinks starts thinking he's turning black or something like that. Anyway, it was a very, very good show, very consciousness raising. It was a good way to start. It was pop culture's way of licking the envelope that all the civil rights stuff from a couple previous 2 decades had been pushing. But it came out, and no sooner does it come out than these Archie Bunker for President bumper stickers and buttons by people who thought this was a show where finally there's a guy on TV saying what I've been saying all the time. Kind of like the Donald Trump thing now, where you think that would be a whole parody, that it's a burlesque. But then you see this substantial number of people, probably not as many who were supporting Archie Bunker, but a substantial number of people who don't see the satire, who don't see the burlesque. They say, this is what I've always been thinking. I have to confess, my grandfather loved Archie Bunker and saw no sense of irony. Part of that, I think, has to do with the series television. You can't show a really negative character in the series because the continuation domesticates them. A season in, Tony Soprano was a huggable mafia guy. Don Draper, for all of his horridness, was that's why movies can really show bad people in a way that continuing series ultimately can.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Archie Bunker, can we just watch 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that okay? So, because here's the thing, that Parker and Stone have explicitly said, and Dan can talk about this at great length as he's deep in his thesis right now, that Cartman is built around Archie Bunker. So if you are unfamiliar with Archie Bunker, then you're missing a piece of how this character is a continuation of a long narrative.
But that don't answer the question, who's the big cheese you having here for lunch? Roger the fairy? Oh, did you hear that? You know who they bring around for lunch? Roger, sweetie, plain Roger. Cut it out, huh?
Who's their friend,
Listen, we run a decent home here. And we don't need any strange little birdies flying in and out.
Stop that. Roger's not a strange little birdie.
His pal Roger is as queer as a $4 bill, and he knows it.
That's not only cruel, Daddy, that's an outright lie.
You know something, Archie? Just because a guy is sensitive and he's an intellectual and he wears glasses, you make him out a queer. I never said a guy who wears glasses is a queer. A guy who wears glasses is a four-eyes. A guy who's a fag is a queer. Well, go ahead, Edith. Now answer the guy. You've seen Roger sashaying around here with his lolly-dog talk. He's a band.
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
I'm not an expert on flowers.
You might as well face it, you're all alone in this. We all know Roger, and we all know he's straight. And even if he wasn't, and I said if, what difference would that make? Do you know that in many countries, England for instance, there is a law that says whatever two consenting adults do in private is their own business? Listen, this ain't England. We threw England out of here a long time ago. We don't want no more part of it. Now, for your information, England is a fair country. What? Say, like they still picking handkerchiefs out of their sleeve, huh? Are they still standing around leaning on them skinny umbrellas like this here? I know the whole society is based on a kind of effect. You know you're right, Archie. You're right. The British are a bunch of pansies. Pansies, fairies, and sissies. And the Japanese are a race of midgets. The Irish are boozers. The Mexicans are bandits. And you Polacks are meatheads.
And just as a side note, that was his nickname for his son-in-law throughout the entire episode, Meathead. Right? So again, and I think we talked about Norman Lear's reaction to people who appreciated Archie Bunker. And Norman Lear was just, couldn't,
Yeah,
Norman
he's
Lear was
still
afraid.
alive and he can't do that. What's interesting about this, though, back in the 70s, is we see the evolution, the use of the word queer here. Who would have guessed when Archie Bunker was saying that we'd be here today and there'd be universities with queer studies departments in them. So it is fascinating how these words do evolve in some sometimes really unexpected ways.
So these were the questions that I had laid out. I appreciate all of you sticking out this warm, just kind of collect the warmth, so when you go back outside, you have a little buffer of warmth. These are the questions that I was thinking about throughout the evening, and I think we really kind of touched on a lot of them. But I would like to get to this last one. How can we use this episode to talk about race relations and language? So when you hear people kind of mimic or parrot these things, what do you say to them? What do you say to somebody who repeats the offensive jokes without context? How do you use this moment as a teaching tool? I'll open that to our panel.
I was going to say, I remember a lot of the fallout from immediately this episode the next day. And I think the teachable moments, as Cedric used, went down to zero. Because all anyone focused on was how they used the word repeatedly over and over and over again. But no one brought up the fact that this actually can create dialogue. So I think the hugest problem we had with this was a lot of people miss the point and they just jump right on the offensive language. And they go back into the South Park thing of they need to be offensive to be funny and to garner viewers and things like that. So I think a lot of this episode is lost on several people. I think it should have created actually more dialogue than it did. And I mean, this episode, I watched on Fox News the next day, they tore it apart. Meanwhile, the NAACP and the banning of the N-word movement both awarded this episode for its willingness to talk about the word. And I think that once things end up on a sitcom like this, it goes out the window as far as public discussion, is it socially responsible, is this good for people? It just goes out the window. People don't want to believe this can actually be good in some way.
And that's also a worthwhile point, especially President Obama's recent use of the word, right? He uses it explicitly to say that the use of being racist is more than saying that this is not appropriate in public, right? And it was a perfect moment. I remember when I heard it on the radio, I think I started clapping. I was like, thank you. That racism is much more than what you should and should not say. But then, of course, that he used the word, and that was the end of the discussion, right? So, other thoughts on teachable moments? Oh, is there a hand up? My bad. Either one. We'll come to Kiana first and then Shirai.
Yeah, I think between the MLK dinner and then especially having you in class, something that we've been focusing on is like the discourse of questions. So it's not what is appropriate or it's not appropriate, is it why or why not? And like starting to engage in dialogue that provokes like changing the discourse, and if we are offended by something, why is it that we're offended? And maybe also taking accountability for how we approach situations and ask questions to those that offended us.
Excellent.
I think that like some pointers that I could use, I guess, outside of this is like conversations with people when like someone doesn't understand where you're coming from about like a personal experience you have. You can't really ever in like one quick conversation in order to like just tell someone your entire life story and you're not going to understand where you're coming from. So I think just knowing that like what he said at the end was just like I don't understand what you're going through, and that's okay. And I think that that's something that I'm gonna take note of more. And so I think especially with people, it's like it's not your fault, you're not doing it.
Right. And one of the other things that always gets me is it's something I try to especially as a professor, is to say something like, oh, it's a black thing, you wouldn't understand. It's a woman thing, you wouldn't understand, right? It's my job as a professor to make you understand. It's my job as your friend, even not my student. It's my job as your friend to make you understand. So, you know, I have to sit here and I have to unpack it. And if I'm not willing to unpack it with you, well, then what does that say about my relationship with you, right? So again, think about who and why and how you're willing to engage with all of these things. All right, we had Brian and then Tom.
Actually, in relation to what you said about unpacking things and really explaining them, it made me think about like the B plot in the episode about how the man is he's trying to implore on Hartman that this is offensive stuff, but isn't actually explaining why it's offensive. He doesn't explain any of this.
Anything of the history of the word midget at all.
Yeah, I think that's another one of like the very like intelligent points that the episode makes. That we have a lot of groups here in society that just tell us don't do it.
Yes.
Tell teachers stop saying that. Don't do that. It's really messed up. But they'll never explain why, and that's why even to this day, people who would expect like they should know better, they don't know better.
Right.
Because no one's explaining.
And every Halloween we come back and somebody wears blackface or somebody makes some snarky comment about something and we say, oh, that's racist. And they say, oh, I'm sorry. And then we're over it. But at no point do we talk about why is blackface offensive? Why is the word redskin offensive? I should say our word, for which I apologize. Why is a headdress? What does that mean when you just wear it as an accessory? All of these things, we need to understand the history before we can move forward, not just slap people on the wrist for using a word.
I just want to say one quick thing. I think Dan brought up a really good point. Good luck on your thesis, man. Very good stuff. But I'm actually in a satire group on campus called Kumquat, and this is my first year, but in the past, the Kumquat has been criticized for some satirical stuff that they've made that has been not taken in the way that it's supposed to be. So
the way it was encoded, it may have been decoded in a different way.
Yeah.
You got that
I guess really what my question is like, how responsible is it? How responsible should the people who create satire be for the misinterpretations that it so frequently gets?
You want to talk about Hill TV? Should I talk about Hill TV?
Yeah, since you open it out, we just mentioned it, right?
Are you guys familiar with Hill TV, the Hill TV scandal? So it was 2005, right? So there was this program there was a channel, it was Hill TV, it was a Syracuse program, and it was a satirical program. I can pull up the montage for you. Long story short, we should watch it, because if you don't know it, you're all Syracuse students, this is part of your history too, is failed satire that caused the entire station to go down. So if you're not familiar with it, we can watch a quick segment, but as I'm bringing it up, I will give it to our panel to talk about what the responsibility is, and then we can watch how that went down here on this campus. So, your memories of Hill TV, or, no, not that one. What is the responsibility of satirists for their audience, or either one? You done with your selfie?
It's for the Instagram related thing.
Okay. So yeah, what is the responsibility of satirists or the Hill TV scandal?
Well, wow. Hill TV, let me say this right now. Hill TV scandal, when that happened, it was my first year here at Syracuse University. I'm just graduating out of college. And I've seen a lot of stuff, but that was climactic on this campus.
There's a white...
Oh, well, wait, no.
Go ahead.
You want to play it?
Yeah.
All right.
female in search of a black male that have fun. There's a white female in search of a black male that have fun. You want to come play with me? Damn, that sounds familiar.
I like the black sausage.
That's a previous chance.
Anthony will be returning to find the perfect people for their hit show True Life with this latest installment, True Life. I'm from Long Island, I can barely read, and I drive a BMW that my daddy bought me because I accidentally drove the Range Rover into a pole and I was driving drunk and giving roadhead to some guy I didn't know at the same time.
The only thing that stood between Forth and the rest of his life was a college degree. Unable to get into college like normal teenagers because of his mild retardation,
Fourth had two options in life.
Even older men are in luck. Sexy single white female in search of my ultimate sugar daddy to spoil me rotten. Wow, that must be from a trial sister.
First, the sorority diet. This one's easy. Just 2 small servings of parsley and ice cubes every day. But where's the protein, you ask? In the load you'll be guzzling, of course. And no spitting. If you're not up to starving yourself, try the fraternity diet. The core of this program is leftover keg drool, but you also need lots of cocaine, steakums, and load.
One. Oh, we rockin' it here in the soul of use. We puffin' that herb and we sippin' that juice. I'm standing out here in the ghetto where they string up more than Geppetto. But don't be scared of where I'm at. I got no fears cause I brought my gat. I got that bling on my Escalade cause I sell more drugs than Rite Aid. You'll try to impress me with your banter, but your shit's uglier than Nancy Cantor. I'm a pimp. Can't you see I got more underage girls than Club BC? It's over now, you know the drill. I'm overwhelmed for Over the Hill. 1.
Alright, we'll pause on that one. That seems like a good place to stop. So actually, I believe the incident itself was hanging a noose from a tree, and that was the final straw.
But I have to tell you, what really brought this out was that they were trying to get attention, right? So they took this story to the DO, and the DO did not like Hill TV, so it maximized their presence and brought everybody on campus to a whole other level of being pissed with these guys and women who all did this. So it was chaos for us in terms of trying to bring the climax of it was just really rough for students, especially a lot of students of color, a lot of LGBT community. It made students feel very unsafe, you know. So how do we deal with it? We had a town hall with the folks who put it on, and with a whole lot of students. I mean, over 1,000 students, white, black, everyone. So I mean, the object is that those students who were involved in that, they got the repercussions. I mean, they had, the TV was suspended. I mean, this is only the only TV, the only student-run television, and I think it was one of the few that was one of the only.
And then Citrus came out like 2 years
right,
after
2 years.
that.
So they were suspended, and they wasn't able to do work. And that was the university really stepping up and taking action on that. But then all the other students who were not involved in that now are hurt by it because they can't do the work that they need in order to build their portfolios, right? So it was just a tough time for a lot of faculty, staff, because there was a number of faculty who were there who were speaking out about it. Some people left the university after that year. So yeah, students just left too. It's like, it was really hard. You know, you're a first year student and you just hear you're a transfer student, you come in international, and you're like, what is going on here?
And I think this was right when Jon Stewart had either just taken over the Daily Show or was really getting big at that point.
That was right after the 2004 election,
Yeah.
when they started picking up Peabody.
Yeah.
Picking up.
And so the intent, or at least part of it, was, wow, let's do something like that here.
And I think that's what happens with our office. And I mean, actually, residents have started the conversation about race and ethnicity. And I think that opened up a door for more conversation about race and ethnicity and gender. And so I think that space has developed over the years. Of course, we had to get through to that time, right? And that helped us to be prepared for these times that's coming. Because it's always something new. Every year, it's always someone bringing something new. It might not be as grandiose as that, but.
Well, let me come back to Jesse's question really quickly, and that is, what is the responsibility of producers or satirists to be aware of or consider the audience's?
That was Tom.
That was Tom. Oh, my bad. Now you're sitting next to each other.
Okay. It's the beard, I know.
What was that?
It's the beard.
It's the beard. It's the beard. Thank you, Tom. The responsibility of satirists to consider their audience. Well, and this is what I say for those of you in my race and gender class, is you need to be considering your audience. That is the first rule of being at Newhouse. You need to consider your audience. And you're in a place now where you can't speak to one audience, right? That the way media operates is that all audiences can see anything. Otherwise, like I never watch Fox News, but if something happens on Fox, I know Trevor Noah, now, right, because Stewart's gone, is going to find it, bring it to me, and make me laugh at it, right? So you are no longer, the media environment is no longer in this sort of safe space where you can speak to your audience. You are speaking to all audiences all the time. And you really need to consider how might everybody interpret this. Now, that's not to say you should do it differently. You can do whatever you like, but you need to be able to anticipate so that you don't have Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton knocking on your door, right? That you know this is what I was going for, this is how it's going to be interpreted by this other group, and I'm prepared to have this conversation and stand behind my work. And in order to do that, you need to be aware of all those histories and all of that stuff. So, you know, you're working at a satirical outlet here. To not be aware of Hill TV, that was only 10 years ago, right? That this is part of our culture here and an issue that the university has dealt with multiple times over. So being a media producer in this environment is infinitely harder, in my opinion, than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
And I want to say, before you say something, I just want to say something because I think the students are a lot smarter now and they're not having it. I mean, as you can see, how they protested last year, I mean, I think you're in a really bad space if you try something with the number of students, the students that we have today. They're really, I think their mindsets are a lot smarter and they're a little bit more conscious about.
More aware.
Yes. And so I don't think there's going to, I mean, you probably have 3,000 or 4,000 people now versus having 3 or 400.
And I would also say after the Charlie Hebdo case or incident, Gary Trudeau, are you familiar with Gary Trudeau, the author of Doonesbury?
Yes.
Right? Gary Trudeau wrote an article called The End of Satire, because satire effectively rolls up, right? Whereas shit rolls downhill. Right. Satire rolls uphill. It is a space in which marginalized or subjugated voices, whatever that subjugation is, be it age, be it whatever, have an opportunity to reflect and comment on a power structure. So when it goes downhill, when you have somebody in power mocking someone not in power, is that satire or is that just reinforcing the hegemonic norm? So all of these directionality issues.
Yeah, and not to eat up all the time here, but I mean, I would say that, you know, there's a big argument that this isn't even satire, which, you know, who's to say? But
it is out of context, right? It's a whole bunch of clips, so I will put that out there.
You know, just a really quick question. For the people who took the South Park episode, or one of the many South Park episodes that were not taken as they were supposed to be encoded, if you will, is it their responsibility for the people who did not understand the satirical aspects of the episode, or would it be more on the viewer?
Well, we talk about responsibility. I think it's everyone's responsibility. And, you know, maybe the next conversation we have is we invite Parker and Stone out here for a conversation to talk about these things, right? That absolutely, as a viewer, it's your responsibility. As a producer, it's your responsibility. We are all responsible. And I think that's really also part of the narrative. We all need to listen and we all need to be responsible. And when you see something, you say something, you learn something, and you do better. So I think we're all responsible. Shelby, are there any other hands after Shelby? Okay, well then we're coming to the end, so maybe I'll give Shelby the last word and then have our panel close out with their thoughts and break out into the cold. Shelby.
Well, I think it's pretty clear from the conversation that satire is like acceptable and done correctly. In like one sentence, I guess, when did you say that satire is appropriate or destructive?
Well, that seems like a good closing question. Thank you. When does satire work? And actually, when I heard you say when satire is done correctly, I take umbrage with the word correctly, right? Because different audiences will say something different about correct. So, constructive, correctly. If you were to give a recommendation to a satirist, and my recommendation, as I already said, is to review all your audiences, all your history, so you know what you're poking fun at and in what context. That would be my recommendation for constructive satire. What would be your recommendations for constructive satire?
I'd be uncomfortable with there being a set of women. And I'm even a little uncomfortable with the audience. I mean, I think there was some great, I'm trying to think, Emily Dickinson did not consider her audience. She wrote some really, really fine ones. I think to some extent this responsibility is you want everybody to be responsibility. It's a decent human being. We are civilized. We're no longer just animals. I think everybody does anything, whether you're building a house or you're making a television show. We hope that everybody has that kind of responsibility. But I don't like this idea. I mean, we all have them in our head. You ever heard someone tell a joke and they say too soon? You know, like we can tell Pearl Harbor jokes, but we can't tell 9/11. I mean, everybody's got a different, but we share a lot of what that is. I would be really uncomfortable, and that's one of the things that I think made Hill TV so complex back in the day, is that one of the things you expect artists to do is to be the fools, the clowns. They say things that are outrageous, and you don't want that necessarily to go away, even if a lot of people find it offensive. Because it becomes the thing that we can then jump on and attack. They become they're the fools that rush in where angels fear to tread, and then there's somebody we can say, that's where that, what we consider uncivilized versus civilized. The only people that ever got anything done in the Shakespeare tragedies were the clowns. They were oddly enough the smartest people on more than the kings or anything else. So that whole idea of when's it appropriate, when's it not appropriate, you let the people who consume it do that. I think the responsibility may be not so much of the artists that make it, it's the people who decided to keep it on the air, the distributors. They have to decide out of all these choices whether we're going to keep letting these guys do this, and whether what they're doing is past some kind of standard that they've got. The artists, you almost need them to do the crazy thing that they do.
No, I have to agree with Bob. You can't really there's no list, there's no way you could do it. All I can say is there's a fine line between, I don't even say fine, between cynicism and satire, and I think a lot of people mistake those two things. So all I can really say as a recommendation is use satire as to comment and criticize society, but cynicism tends to be a lot more dark and just hateful, so try not to be cynical. That's all I can say.
And I would just clarify, my recommendations are not for how to create content. My recommendations are to anticipate the future, right? So, and that's really, that's the human situation. We have the consciousness to anticipate the future, and what do you got to do to not have to kiss Jesse Jackson's backside? Thoughts? Last two thoughts?
I'm struggling. I don't know. I'm an artist myself, and I know I have a responsibility as an artist to, what I'm presenting to the world. But I don't know. It's just a hard space. I don't know. I don't have any one answer. I just think they just need to be more responsible for what they're doing, because at the end of the day, someone's being hurt, somewhere.
On that note, I only watch kitty videos. So many of our jokes are based on hurting another person. I'm like, I just want to see a kitten fall off the table and walk away. It brings me so much joy.
And I would say I am, not in the communications realm field. I'm basically, I grew up and became an RA for life, so that's kind of my context for all this. It's a great job. But I would say that, and this is something, that you had mentioned, Charisse, that it's kind of being ready for what the response is and taking ownership for it. Like to me, it's pushing the envelope and it's putting the thoughts and ideas out there, and it's challenging whether it's power structures or ideas or even just putting your own vision of what it is out there, but then owning that. And I will say, I won't say which one, but one of these students in here I became quite connected to. He was in the RA selection process. We did not allow him to go further. He came back the next year. We hired him. And we hired him as a professional staff member, as an assistant RD later on while he was working on his master's degree. And the growth in that young man from here to where I know he is now was phenomenal as far as his own personal development. He went through hell to kind of get some of that, but that's because he came to an understanding that what they did damaged a lot of folks too. And so there was that ownership and it was pain. But he kind of, and so to me, those are some of the spaces too, be willing to learn from your mistakes, and that's really about all we can expect of ourselves or anybody.
So on that note, thank you all for